Welcome to How to Lobby Your Member of Congress Part 2. Don't panic if you missed Part 1. Unlike The Godfather Part 2, we're all back, so no unfamiliar faces. And unlike many sequels, this program will make sense to you even if you haven't seen Part 1, which we suggest you look at to further build your lobbying skills. Right now, let's take a moment to share with you from Part 1 why we've produced this set of videos. One of the more important roles of a school board member is to advocate and lobby lawmakers at the local, state, and federal levels on behalf of all of the students and taxpayers in your district. Year-round, ongoing communication with your elected representatives is crucial, and that should include periodic face-to-face meetings with your congressman both in Washington, D.C. and in the member's congressional district. These meetings are especially important to a successful lobbying effort. In this video, we're going to address how you can most effectively lobby your members of Congress. But the lessons you learn during the next several minutes can also be applied to your other school board lobbying activities at the state and local level. Now, we'll be showing you more examples of things you can do to make your visit to your legislator the productive meeting you want it to be. We'll join our board members after the introductions who are already in the course of the meeting. In our first scenario, you'll see how the school board members present multiple issues for congressional support. The member of Congress asks them to narrow down their request to the single most important issue, successfully derailing their agenda for the meeting.
Given the current economic conditions across the state, our community is having a difficult time in meeting the needs of our students. We'd like you to ask the committee chair to increase the funding levels for Title I.
In addition, new reporting requirements from the federal government overburden our staff, and Congressman Jones has a bill to address this problem that we'd like you to support.
Now, in our community, there's a strong local group that supports federal voucher legislation, which in our viewpoint is not in the best interest of the children, and we strongly urge you to vote against it.
We really need your support and leadership here in Washington to address all of our concerns.
Well, I appreciate your hard work on behalf of these challenges for our children back home. I expect there's growing concern from my colleagues as well. Now, I'll be meeting with some of them in a few days, informally. Which one of these issues would you say is the most important?
Well, increased funding, wouldn't you say that's...
Opposing vouchers.
Not funding.
The reporting burden
So
is...
it's not funding.
Funding is clearly the #1 issue. Funding, yes, that's it.
Given our current budget challenges on Capitol Hill, I know it will be difficult, but I'll do what I can.
If Representative Brighton doesn't feel like Dirty Harry, he should. Go ahead. Make my job easy. Our board members identified several issues they considered important, which required help from Washington. Brighton trapped them into narrowing their lobbying down to one issue when he asked them which one was most important. And he made his job easy. Let's give our board members another chance to tell the congressman about their needs without Dirty Harrying themselves. We'll pick up with Representative Brighton's response.
Well, I appreciate your hard work on behalf of these challenges for our children back home. I expect there's growing concern from my colleagues as well. Now, I'll be meeting with some of them in a few days, informally. Which one of these issues would you say is the most important?
Well, Congressman, they're all very important. We believe that the folks back home would want to know that you'd address all of them. Can we count on you to support all 3 of the issues?
No, I see your point. They're all important. Yes, I can see that.
That's much better. Our board members presented their concerns without implying that one was more important than the others. And when the congressman tried to get them to make one issue a main priority so that it was easier for him, they didn't play along. They asked him to support all their priorities and kept them all on the table. Don't get caught in the trap of narrowing down your advocacy agenda unless there's a good reason to do it. Now, let's take a look at another troubling situation. In this one, board members get trapped into suggesting cuts in other programs in order to achieve their education priorities.
Congressman, as you're aware, both Title I and IDEA programs continue to be underfunded. We have data here that illustrates how much we've been shortchanged each year over the last 5 years.
This shortfall is really impacting our school budget.
And we've had many discussions with you before on how the number of students eligible for Title I has significantly increased over the past 5 years, and the fact that current funding only supports 50% of those eligible.
I really understand the need for increased funding, but to do what you're asking for, we'll have to find offsets. Any suggestions?
Well, I think there are funds to be gained by reducing the appropriations for impact aid and vocational and technical education.
How about the big money federal government pays for drugs or medicine?
Well, that would involve cutting into entitlement programs, which we can't do. Any other recommendations?
I think we should look at some Defense Department appropriations.
Well, I'm afraid politically we can't use the defense budget as an offset for a domestic program.
Well, I don't know. Okay, we'll take what we can get, Congressman. What do you think?
I'm guessing the congressman thinks this conversation has about as much future as a Defense Department offset. Representative Brighton was trying to make our friends responsible for priority-setting decisions as a precondition for getting more education funding. In the first recommendation for funding, the board members suggested trading one education program for another. That's completely unacceptable. Then they went after programs outside their areas of expertise, making recommendations that wouldn't work politically or practically. They derailed their advocacy for funding education. Look, our board forgot why they're here. Board members are first and foremost advocates for public education. Choosing priorities is the congressman's job, just like setting the school district budget and balancing the interests of various community groups is the school board's job. Tit for tat may be the congressman's game, but it shouldn't be yours. Let's let the members try again.
I really understand the need for increased funding, but to do what you're asking for, we'll have to find offsets. Any suggestions?
Congressman, we're here to let you know about the problems our local schools are facing back home in your district and the expectations of the parents.
That's right, Congressman. The people in our district believe that we, as elected officials, will do everything possible to secure increased support for our public schools. Can we count on you to find a way to get these funding increases?
Now that's all that. Leave finding the offsets to the member. Just make sure he or she knows that education funding is a priority for you and should be for the member too. Okay, check out this next scenario. Representative Brighton turns a discussion about education legislation into a pitch for his own agenda. Smooth, but nasty.
I know you had a specific bill you mentioned earlier. Tell me about it.
Oh, yes, that's right. Your support of H.R. 9998 would provide competitive grants and delegate greater authority to local school districts in the design of performance management systems for teachers and administrators.
And you'll recall that should the local school district apply for and be approved for the grant, this bill would encourage full engagement of teachers and administrators, but delegate final authority to the board.
This is good. I'm glad we're talking about areas where we can be of help to each other. Now, as you may know, Congressman Reed and I have just drafted a bill to establish a new commission to design a national professional development program for principals to prepare them for meeting the new demands of the 21st century. Your support would be very helpful to me.
Congressman, I think that's just fantastic. You are so supportive of public education.
Well, I'm not convinced that a commission could make a single program that would meet the broad needs of principals across the whole country.
It seems to me that we should discuss the possibilities of Congressman Brighton's bill before we just dismiss it out of hand.
Well, that makes sense to me. I mean, I can see.
How did we get on support for the congressman's bill? Oh, yes, I remember.
This is good. I'm glad we're talking about areas where we can be of help to each other. Now, as you may know, Congressman Reed and I...
When Congress outlawed bait and switch in stores, maybe they should have outlawed it in their offices, too. Congressman Brighton baited our board members with a discussion of a bill they were interested in, just so he could switch the conversation to one he wanted support for. It's a ploy that's not uncommon. Although in some cases the members' goals and yours are the same, in other cases the members' goals and yours are different. Either way, clarify your position, and get the focus back on your agenda. Let's see how that might work. We'll pick it up with Brighton's switch attempt.
This is good. I'm glad we're talking about areas where we can be of help to each other. Now, as you may know, Congressman Reed and I have just drafted a bill to establish a new commission to design a national professional development program for principals to prepare them for meeting the new demands of the 21st century. Your support would be very helpful to me.
I'm sure your bill is well intended, Congressman Brighton, and we would be happy to review it. However, what we're looking for here today in our draft legislation is different.
We've brought data and background information to support our legislation. We also want you to know that a strong partnership is growing between our school district and the business community for the teacher preparation included in this bill.
Well, I appreciate your concern, and it's obvious that H.R. 9998 is very important to you and the schools in our district. I can see that. Maybe I can send some material to you about my bill to review later. But for right now, let me get more information about H.R. 9998, and after we've had a chance to look it over further, I'll have my legislative assistant work directly with you on the bill.
Okay, that's a lot better. And the old bait and switch was comfortably avoided. For starters, the board members recognized the tactic. They reacted quickly, but respectfully. They acknowledged the congressman's bill, but reminded him that they were there to discuss their bill. And then they showed him they were serious about H.R. 9998 by providing information to back up both their position and the intent of the bill. Remember that you have only a short time with the members. Any time they take discussing their legislation comes off your clock, not theirs. Don't fall for the old bait and switch, or you may wind up with buyer's remorse. All right, let's take a look at another tactic you might encounter. The old Brooklyn Dodgers, before the infamous move to LA, those old Dodgers was famous for saying, "Wait till next year." Watch Representative Brighton use that excuse to delay action on our friends' priority issues.
We appreciate that you understand why it's so important that we know that you're with the community on education issues. That's why we want to be sure that during this session of Congress, you'll support the amendments to the current law that we've proposed. Can we count on you?
Look, I want to be honest with you and let you know that addressing that legislation during this session won't be easy. Now, I believe these amendments are important, but Capitol Hill is a unique place. And although it may seem like the right thing to do now, often timing plays an important part in getting a bill or amendments to pass. In looking at the legislative agenda for the remainder of this session, it looks pretty doubtful that this issue would come to a committee vote and then a full House vote before Congress adjourns. And there are so many other legislative items on the calendar. Moreover, the election year climate's just not good for these kinds of changes right now. Now, I'll certainly try, but I can't make any promises. Maybe next year would be better.
Well, sure, I see your point, Congressman. Well, you all see where he's coming from, don't you?
Sure, we'll just come back. Maybe next year?
Maybe next year would be better.
Feeling a little bit like a Dodger fan, Rick? The board members got all the Dodgers from Brighton, didn't they? First, they heard there was not enough time. Then it was, there are so many other legislative items on the calendar. And of course, there was the election year climate isn't right. And finally, the old wait till next year. Sadly, our folks kindly accepted all of the excuses. Don't accept delay excuses simply to be polite. By conceding your position on issues and accepting the status quo, you're shortchanging your school district. That's not what we expect from our board members, is it? So, let's let them have a do-over. We'll skip most of Brighton's babble.
Moreover, the election year climate's just not good for these kinds of changes right now. Now, I'll certainly try, but I can't make any promises. Maybe next year would be better.
Congressman Brighton, we understand there will always be competing priorities in politics here on Capitol Hill. But we also want to know, and the folks back home are most concerned, about what you can do now. We also understand that with elections every other year, members of Congress would want to know that their support for our schools is well demonstrated. Can we depend on you?
Spoken like a winner. Let the other teams wait till next year. You and your school district deserve more than excuses for not getting it done. Harriet reminded the congressman that there's rarely a right time for any particular piece of legislation. Then she drove home the point that action is needed now. Finally, of course, she reminded him that every other year is an election year. Never let your member of Congress evade securing congressional support that addresses the needs of your school district unless you feel that delay is strategically correct. Insisting on support doesn't always mean you'll get it, but conceding to excuses ensures that your needs will rarely receive a high priority. Your role is to be a strong advocate for the needs of your school district. Every meeting has to be a championship season. Okay, here's another tactic you might see. Representative Brighton doesn't want to commit to the board member's policy position because there are others back home who disagree with it.
Congressman Brighton, we need your help to oppose legislation that could have a negative impact on our capital construction and modernization program.
I know which one you mean, and I certainly understand what this means to you and the folks back home. However, I want you to be aware there's another strong group of organizations from the community who have already come to seek my support for this legislation. Now, I'm only telling you this because we've been friends a long time. However, I have to be honest about this. This could create some problems for me later back home, and as well as here in Washington, too.
Sure. Well, we understand the difficult position that this would present for you.
Right, and we certainly don't want to put you in an uncomfortable position.
Is that a congressman I see off the hook and swimming away? Actually, this was such a weak casting attempt, they may never have really reeled him in the first place. The board members asked for support, and the congressman indicated that he had constituent opposition back home. He felt squeezed in the middle and hoped our group would back off and make his job easier. At times, you may find yourself put on the hook by a vacillating congressman. Here's how you get off.
Congressman Brighton, we need your help to oppose legislation that could have a negative impact on our capital construction and modernization program.
I know which one you mean, and I certainly understand what this means to you and the folks back home. However, I want you to be aware there's another strong group of organizations from the community who have already come to seek my support for this legislation. Now, I'm only telling you this because we've been friends a long time. However, I have to be honest about this. This could create some problems for me later back home, and as well as here in Washington, too.
We certainly understand that there can be differing views on an issue. That's why we've brought you some information that'll provide a comprehensive view of this issue.
In fact, it also indicates why some of the data that our opponents use to help develop their position is inaccurate. The reality is that our schools are severely overcrowded. So not only do we need to build a new school, we need to modernize 6 other schools.
We'd be happy to provide additional information to show the high level of support for these construction projects if need be. Perhaps there may be some way the concerns on the other side can be addressed while meeting the goals of this important construction project.
That sounds like a very reasonable approach. Let me see what I can do to move things forward towards a workable solution.
That's terrific, Congressman. Your leadership will be appreciated.
He's off the hook again. But this time it's because our board members chose to use catch and release, a much more comfortable result for both the fish and those fishing. As an advocate, your first loyalty is the needs of your local schools. Members of Congress were elected to make the hard decisions between competing views in Washington, D.C., just as you are locally. The board members express understanding for the conflicted circumstances, but reinforce the importance of their position. Then they acknowledge that even if 2 groups have taken opposing positions on a bill, there may be room for compromise. Sometimes there's more common support for legislation than expected, which may not be possible when core principles are involved. Show the representative how his leadership can help both sides win. If she or he does show leadership, acknowledge it and extend your thanks. Involvement with local schools issues reinforces the all politics is local dogma. In the next scenario, our board members push for their positions but fail to admit that there may be significant local opposition.
Congressman, before this meeting ends, we'd like to turn to another important issue: proposed federal requirements for school districts to establish health centers in all schools. You see, We're concerned that while the requirements would be established, the funding won't be allocated.
We're also concerned that local school districts don't have the capacity to take the full responsibility for training, evaluation, recruitment, and operations of quality health service centers.
And furthermore, community-based health service centers are closing due to the lack of adequate funding. Will school districts be pressured to provide underfunded services, not only to the students but to their families as well?
Yes, I certainly understand the situation. Is there any strong opposition to your viewpoints back home?
Well, initially, there may be some opposition, but not much.
Yeah, a little, but not much. Wouldn't you agree?
Okay, that's not going well at all. It started as a great conversation on an important issue. Too bad the board members set up their potential ally to be blindsided. If there's indication back home that there's significant opposition to your position, board members should be honest, especially if directly asked about it. Never be vague about a real controversy. If there's local controversy, it won't be long before it surfaces. Our board members should have provided full disclosure, like this.
Yes, I certainly understand the situation. Is there any strong opposition to your viewpoints back home?
Yes, there are some groups that don't agree with our position, but we believe that their data is not totally correct. We've brought some additional material with us that will describe their position and provide additional data that will make it clear why such legislation should not be enacted.
I really appreciate your honesty and letting me know there are others back home that have a different view.
That's better. The board members disclosed that there's opposition. They spared the congressman from being blindsided and from the possibility of embarrassment had he publicly supported their position, only later to find out the members weren't honest with him. No political damage control required for him or them. Always deal honestly. You'll establish a foundation on which there will be mutual trust in your future advocacy with your representative. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm ready for this meeting to end.
Congressman, we certainly want to thank you for your time and your strong support of our schools.
We'll let the folks at home know how supportive you've been and that you've agreed to introduce our amendment.
Well, it's been my pleasure meeting with all of you, and have a safe trip.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Congressman.
Nice to see you.
Well, that's a nice way to close the meeting, but the curtain came down before the opera ended. You see, the meeting was fine in terms of securing support for one specific amendment, but it ended without building a relationship for the future. And that's a vital step to a successful meeting. Let's raise the curtain back up and see how that should have gone.
Congressman, we certainly want to thank you for your time and your strong support of our schools.
We'll let our folks back home know just how supportive you've been and that you've agreed to introduce our very important amendment.
And we also want to offer you our assistance if you would like some informal feedback to any of the educational proposals that come your way.
We can also provide some impact data or stories from people back home to help you strengthen your position on pending legislation.
Absolutely. And through our State School Boards Association and the National School Boards Association, we can solicit the help of other local school board members to support a position that's consistent with our association's policies and resolutions. Would you be interested in such support?
Oh, that would be extremely helpful to me. I'll have a member of my staff follow up to set your suggestions in motion.
Now there's an aria to close a meeting on. The congressman's already calling for an encore. Here are a few tips for further building your relationship with your representative. If it feels right, ask if the member of Congress has an education advisory committee. If there is one, offer to be involved and to help guide it. During the year when your representative votes correctly on an issue of concern to the education community, give public praise for the vote and make sure that your member of Congress and the education aide know that you spoke up. Identify local impact data and stories that you should send to the education aide. Establish a process of providing information to build up more recognition and credibility. These steps will help secure support for specific legislation, and they'll open the door for a positive, more permanent relationship with your representative. And that will be a win-win for your school district and your member of Congress. The fact is that meetings end, but the show never stops. So do your homework before the meeting. Present your district and yourself effectively, and follow through after you go home, including a letter of thanks that reinforces your issues and expectations. We hope that this presentation helps you prepare for an effective meeting with your legislators, whether in Washington or at home, producing your desired results. If you have any questions, please contact the National School Boards Association at 1-800-609-NSBA or visit our website at nsba.org/advocacy. We always welcome your feedback and are ready to answer any questions. Now, give yourself an ovation.